Hello.
Hello, good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
I think you couldn't hear me, yes.
Okay,
I'll
yeah.
just welcoming everyone to the webinar, and going to hand over to one of the electricity lawyer team members to briefly introduce the moderator, and then you can take over. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. You're welcome to ELectrify Conversations. My name is Becky Sulaiman from Electricity Lawyer. And today, we have a lineup of key industry experts to help us with the discussion for today. But to start with, I would like to introduce the moderator for today's event, Mr. Alfred Olufemi. So just a brief background of Mr. Alfred Olufemi. Mr. Alfred Olufemi is a freelance investigative journalist based in the United Kingdom. In the past 6 years, he has worked with different media houses, including Nigeria's prominent newspaper, Punch, and leading investigative journalism platform like Premium Times. Some of his works have also been featured in the BBC, Al Jazeera, and Guardian UK. Mr. Olufemi is recognized with multiple awards, and he specializes in reporting health, human rights, governance, and legal issues on the African continent. Mr. Alfred Olufemi is an award-winning journalist of the 2023 African Prize for Investigative Journalism, the West African Media and Excellence Awards, and the Diamond Award for Media Excellence, among others. Mr. Alfred Olufemi, on behalf of Electricity Lawyer, I welcome you to moderate the event. Over to you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Once again, I welcome every one of us all to this edition of Electrify Conversation. a series run by the electricity lawyer, a research, legal, and regulatory service provider for power markets and stakeholders in sub-Saharan Africa. And today we'll be discussing a very important topic that is critical to Africa's energy transition. If you followed events in the past couple of years regarding the energy sector in Africa and even globally, you discover that the world is trying to move from fossil fuel to renewable energy sources. And one of the hindrances, some say, is the Energy Charter Treaty that was signed in 1994 by 50. Currently, we have 53 signatories, including 7 African countries. Now, it's a known fact that the ECT, because of its structure and because of the concerns to promote energy security and also energy investment across different countries, has a solid backing for fossil fuel. And now, as it stands, a lot of European countries are exiting the charter, and some of are planning to as well. And in all of these, you can see that Africa as a continent, the African partners they seem unmoved, and because some of them have just discovered oil, and some of them are still interested in fossil-based operation. That's one of the major conversation we'll be having today, and we have a lineup of panelists who are resource persons in their various fields. We have Professor Raphael from the University of Pau in France, and we have Mr. Hayuk, who will be dissecting this topic. And we have discussions to do. And before then, we'll keynote address. Then we have electricity lawyer presentation. I'm trying to run through the order of program, and then we have the discussion session, and we'll be ending with the question and answer session where members of the audience can ask questions regarding any aspect of the discussion. And I mean, these questions will be treated by our resource persons. So in the meantime, if you have any question or any clarification, you can always use the chat box and then we'll address it. So before we go further into the program, I would like to introduce our speakers and just read a brief citation before we proceed. Our keynote speakers and panelists today will be Professor Raphael Efron, Energy Justice and the Social Contract Chair of University of Pau in France. Professor Raphael is a professor of energy law, justice, the social contract, and sustainability at the University of Pau in France. He's also the Jean Monnet Professor in the Just Transition to a Low Carbon Economy, awarded by the European Commission between 2019 and 2022. In 2020, he was appointed as senior counsel at Janssen Law Firm in Brussels, Belgium. Professor Efron is a qualified barrister at law and a graduate of both Oxford and Cambridge. He also holds a degree from the University of St. Andrews and Trinity College in Dublin. His work all as a principal focus on achieving a sustainable and just transition to a low carbon economy and combines a mix of law, policy, and economics. He has published over 200 publications of different types and is the most cited scholar in his field worldwide for energy law, energy justice, and just transition worldwide. Some of these works have been translated into multiple languages, including Chinese, Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Arabic, Persian. Professor Efron has given just over 200 keynotes or guest lectures in 61 countries worldwide. I invite you all to welcome to this program, Professor Efron. Do we have Professor Efron in the
Yeah.
room? All right. Thanks for coming today, sir.
So would you like me to begin my talk now? Or you're...
No, not yet. I mean, just for our audience to see you and see the face behind the citation. Yeah, so I'll be proceeding to our second panelist, Mr. N.J. Ayuk, the Executive Chairman of African Energy Chamber and CEO of Centurion Law Group. Mr. Ayuk is the Executive Chairman of African Energy Chamber and the CEO of Pan-African Corporate Law Conglomerate, Centurion Law Group. He's also the author of Amazon best-selling book, A Just Transition, Making Energy Poverty History with an Energy Mix, Big Barriers, as well as Amazon and Wall Street Journal's best-selling Billions at Play, The Future of African Energy and Doing Deals. His experience includes advising major companies and governments on energy issues and investment strategy. NJ graduated from the University of Maryland College Park and earned a Juris Doctor from William Mitchell College of Law and an MBA from the New York Institute of Technology. Can we have Mr. Ayuk in the house? Do we have him here? I think Mr. Ayuk will be joining us in a jiffy. But before then, I would like to proceed to one of our panelists and the main brain, I would like to call her, behind the electricity lawyer. She's the founder of Electricity Lawyer and a partner at George Etomi and Partners. Evie Hamo is a renowned multi-jurisdictional expert in the energy sector with over 5 years experience, where she has been involved in a wide array of complex transactions for multiple clients in Nigeria and across Africa. She's the founder of Electricity Lawyer, a novel data-driven research, legal, and regulatory service provider, offering tailored aggregated tools, resources, solutions, and services cutting across power markets in sub-Saharan Africa for better informed decision making by stakeholders. The goal of Electricity Lawyer is to promote energy access through knowledge access. EV has and continues to provide expert legal, regulatory governance, and transaction advisory support to global institutions and agencies such as World Bank, US Agency for International Development, Millennium Challenge Corporation, USA, United Nations Office for Project Services, United Kingdom, Nigeria Infrastructure Advisory Facility, US Trade and Development Agency, Economic Community of West African States, the Energy for Growth Hub, and many others. She's a legal and regulatory consultant for energy market and regulatory consultants, a member of the MRC Group. She's also a partner within the Energy and Infrastructure Project Unit at the law firm of George Etomi and Partners. Evie is a member of the Developer Enablers Network of INATIDE. Evie is a doctoral researcher at the Center of Energy, Petroleum, and Mineral Law Policy, University of Dundee. Her PhD, Electricity Law and Regulation, explores legal and regulatory mechanisms to scale up investment in electricity generation capacity across sub-Saharan Africa, while also exploring the intersection between energy access and the transition. Evie is an electricity sector sustainability transformation expert. She helps governments and businesses with their national and corporate re-engineering agenda for a legal policy, governance, regulatory, and strategic viewpoint. She has and continues to advise potential investors seeking to invest in on-grid and off-grid projects across Africa on the legal, regulatory, and commercial framework governing electricity projects and energy projects in general. I would like to welcome Mrs. Evie to this program. Evie, can you say hi?
Thank you very much, Alfred. Good morning, good afternoon, rather. Thank you.
Yeah. So having introduced our resource persons, people who will be dissecting the ECT and the impact of its modernization on Africa's energy transition. I would like to start with the keynote address from Professor Raphael. Join me as I invite Professor Raphael for his keynote address. Professor Raphael, over to you.
Thank you. Could the shared screen option be made available? Okay, thank you. Are you able to see the slides, Alfred?
Yes, we can. You can proceed, sir.
Okay, so I've been asked to speak for 15 minutes, so hopefully I'll keep on time. And as Alfred has suggested, there's plenty of time for questions and answer sessions throughout this couple of hours. So some of the points that I am making with, let's say, question marks. So I will be interested to hear different people's views on some of the issues contained within my presentation. So my name is Raphael Heffron. You've had an introduction to me already. My main work is centered around energy justice, and today we're talking about the energy sector. We're talking about, as Alfred said, the energy transition, and then we're talking about the impact of the Energy Charter Treaty. So I just want to give a small background initially first to my own approach to the area. So you've had an introduction to me already, but so, you know, my view continues what Alfred said in terms of the world is changing. And for me, I'm going to highlight one of the key directions that the world is going towards, then talk briefly about the Energy Charter Treaty and about general rules around international investment and highlighting the weaknesses currently of those rules and to me, how they are inhibiting progress in the new direction that the world is going into. And finally, then talking about maybe some mechanisms or tools to increase accountability in the sector. So when we think of the energy transition and some of the latest developments of why the world is changing, we need to go back. If you look at this slide, we need to go back to the Paris COP21 2015 agreement, and we can consider that agreement where 195 countries signed up and ratified this treaty. Never before had you such international cooperation on an issue. And over the last, let's say, 8 years since that has happened, we're now in 2023, and we're aiming to try and meet a 2030 target in that treaty. But you can see here part of what motivates that treaty and part of why the reason why all those governments signed up to this treaty is that it is clear the aim is to address inequality in society, which is only getting worse. The other aim is to reduce the impacts of climate change. And again, we know over the last couple of years, we are seeing the impacts of climate change even more and more. And then the third box there, we are switching to new clean technology. And that's one of the key points I think we should all remember about the world changing. This is about a technology race. And I would like to, for you to consider this technology is becoming more and more available. The cost is going down. And in a similar way, if you were using your mobile phone today, if I asked you to use a mobile phone from 20 years ago, you would say, no, thank you, I want the latest technology. And we should be demanding the latest technology today. And essentially, when we think of a just energy transition, we want to make sure that the energy transition happens in a fair way where no one is left behind. We are seeing changes to livelihoods that are positive, and that we don't end up with the energy sector that we currently have, which creates a lot of the problems that you have here that I've identified, societal inequalities and major impacts in terms of climate change. So when we think of the energy sector, we think we need to improve across all these 5 activities. So we think energy law needs to change and improve across extraction, production, operation, supply, consumption, waste management and decommissioning. And the basic idea of energy justice, a core area that I work on, is trying to apply human rights across all these 5 activities, trying to protect the different human rights across all these activities. And if we achieve that, we achieve more justice, we achieve a better society, and we address the problem of societal inequality. And when we talk about justice, for those who are more focused in terms of thinking directly, what is this about? There are various principles, generally 5 principles of energy justice: distributive, procedural, restorative, recognition, and cosmopolitan. And I won't go into them in detail here, but the basic idea is these principles of energy justice, they are being adopted in several countries in the key policy documents already. You can see this in the US, in Colombia, and also South Africa, that they are trying to push through energy and climate laws and policies where companies have to follow these energy justice principles. And I think this is a significant development really over the last few years. And when we think of these justice principles, I said they are trying to elevate human rights and give us more protection on issues around human rights. And you think of some of the, let's say, issues that Nigeria has faced with some of the foreign companies in terms of the environmental impacts. You think some of these human rights need to be protected more and more. And you can see them listed in the center in the blue: air, the right to air, health, life, subsistence, water, the environment, security, a fair trial, culture, property, and dignity. All of these we need to start protecting in this energy transition. And even more so when we think that this energy transition is about huge, huge money. 44 trillion is expected to be spent by 2040. And we need to think, in that context of that 44 trillion, this is about a technology race, and it's important that every country get into this technology race. And also this is about diversification. You may have, let's say, certain energy sources or be rich in certain energy sources, but there's also a need to diversify into these new technologies. If you went to any investment law or policy or economic class, one of the first things you would learn was you need to diversify your assets. You don't jump in and spend all your money or spend all your time developing one or two assets. You need to be seeing the sector as a portfolio, and even more so today when you have this new technology coming. So when we think of, what's that relationship between the Energy Charter Treaty and the energy transition and the energy sector today, well, really, we're thinking about this issue of investment, that 44 trillion, and the Energy Charter is one international, let's say, tool that is used to protect investment and to give investors some security that they will get a return on their investment. So it tries to provide a legal framework. It tries to provide, if there's a dispute, that the dispute can be resolved amicably. There can be another number of other instruments associated with it, such as investor-state contracts. It has to deal with domestic law, insurance issues, and other international law instruments. But the Energy Charter Treaty is something that exists out there. And here you can see a table, and this applies to disputes, and these are not solely under the Energy Charter. But the interesting thing here is, if you look at the countries that are taking the claimants, and you see who are the claimants taking the majority of cases in this international investment area, and you just look, where are most of the international energy companies based? Well, they're based in many of the big countries, the United States, the Netherlands, UK, Canada. And you see they're the ones taking a lot of these cases to try and get their money back, as it were. Sometimes you could say it is legitimate, and sometimes you'd say, these are aggressive actions by companies to get a return on their resources. Another problem in the area is, if you look at the arbitrators themselves, here you can see a diagram, you see the reference where this is from. So this may be a bit dated, but my view is that it still holds the same. The principle is the same. Again, many of the arbitrators who are involved, as it were, like judges in these cases, they're all from the same countries where a lot of these companies are coming from. So what you see emerging is, in this whole international investment area, is that it's the same countries where the companies are from, the same people from where these companies are from are deciding on the cases. So if you're a country from outside, let's say, this group, you're going to find it hard to get a decision made in your favor, considering these characteristics. And I just wanted to highlight, there are other cases one could highlight, but in my 15 minutes, I wanted to highlight one case in Nigeria, or from Nigeria, and it is known as the PID case. And it's you can see there in 2019. I'll give a few facts, but you're welcome to read more about this in your own time. But just a few facts: that this was a case taken against the Nigerian state because this project never went ahead. The company blamed the Nigerian state. Essentially, it was a gas project. And they said that at the end of 20 years, this project would have earned them 5 to 6 billion. And therefore, with interest, they were suing the Nigerian state for 9 billion. So what I want you to realize is, imagine that in this case, nothing was ever built. The developer of the project hadn't even passed getting even the environmental permits for the project. And imagine they were able to win a case that they should be guaranteed the payout that they would get after 20 years of operation. So, I mean, this shows you that in 20 years' time, you know, gas may not have been sold at the same price. It may not be worth the same because of issues such as climate change, because the Nigerian government may want to change the law and say, well, we don't want to be using as much gas in future, so it won't be worth as much. But imagine that a company could receive all the money they were expected to make for 20 years. Essentially, if you were an investor in fossil fuel projects, this was seen as a guaranteed investment. And I don't know what other part of the economy that governments were seen as handing out guaranteed 20-year contracts that you didn't even need to get the permits, and you didn't even need to build and develop or produce one bit of gas, and you were able to claim for 20 years of guaranteed operation. Imagine that this type of guaranteed investments exist. And this is the problem with the international investment arena as it currently stands. And it's a key problem with the Energy Charter Secretariat, where, and is partly the reason why many countries are withdrawing, because many countries are saying, well, we may not be using coal, oil, or gas the same way in the future, so they're not worth as much. So how can we be part of a system that means that these companies can sue our state for a guaranteed return on their investment? So this is a hugely unfair process. And you can see here, this case was actually decided by 3 arbitrators. One of them, I believe, was from Nigeria, and 2 were from the UK. And what I would say to you is they voted 2-1 in favor of guaranteeing that the Nigerian state should pay out the 9 billion. And I would also add that the 2 arbitrators, they had very limited knowledge of the energy sector. And for me, that led to a decision where even the public policy issues, you'll see on the second point here, public policy issues around what will be issues around taxation, the project cost evaluation, the environmental issues, the climate change issues, these were all in essence ignored over the 20-year lifespan of the project, and is partly the reason why 9 billion was agreed to be paid out. And what makes it even worse is that the company involved that was suing the Nigerian state, they were from a tax haven, the British Virgin Islands. So you can imagine that even when this company was going to be in operation, there was going to be limited taxation paid to the Nigerian state. So, I mean, this shows the type of system that is in place that countries have to work against when they're dealing with these international investment issues. And let's say I said I would pose some questions. I mean, and when we think of this international investment regime, we think of this Energy Charter Secretariat protecting fossil fuel investments and protecting the investor, essentially guaranteeing them a payout. It's like if you're an international energy company, you can make a bet, you can make a bet and say, well, I'll make this bet, I get this contract signed, and then I get guaranteed money. You can't even do that if you bet on a soccer match. It's absolutely scandalous for what was happening. So I would ask you to consider, is that decision fair? What does it, mean for a state considering investment in their own country? How would this affect your views on climate change, where fossil fuel projects can be guaranteed a payout either way? And should we not be considering public policy issues such as our environment, energy, and climate issues? They are very important, and we should be considering them during the lifetime of the project. and from the very beginning. So when in terms of bringing, my talk to a conclusion, what we need is really a new relationship. And I use the word, we need a new relationship between the energy sector stakeholders, between governments, between the companies, and between citizens. I've shown you the example where, currently the relationship favors international, particularly international fossil fuel investors. They are using foreign companies in tax havens. So, not only can they possibly get a guaranteed payout, if they did get full permission to go ahead with the project, they would be paying a minimal amount of taxation anyway. So the tax return to the country is minimal. But what we should be thinking about is a framework like the Energy Charter Treaty should be withdrawn. And it should be, a new framework should be replaced that takes into account public policy issues. It takes into account where a country may want to go in terms of the technology revolution. And these new investment frameworks should also include issues around technology transfer, making clean technology available much more readily and cheaply to countries. And what we are seeing currently are citizens and governments losing out to industry that have built up this protective mechanism around their investments. And essentially, when you have a guaranteed payout like this, it makes your energy investment in usually oil or gas, it makes it more secure. That means you can borrow at lower costs. It makes it appear much, much cheaper than it currently, than the actual cost. And that makes clean energy options much more expensive looking because of this unfair system. And I just wanted to highlight that this is a very timely session in terms of thinking about international investment, the Energy Charter Treaty, investment disputes. And I just want to point out, in a very big journal in the world, The Lancet, just 2 days ago, they had an article on this topic. That is the reference there. I'll be happy to share it as well. But well worth reading, just published, let's say less than 48 hours ago. So I congratulate the team behind the electricity lawyer for looking at this issue, because it is clearly very timely. And if you want to read some research related to the wider picture here in terms of a new relationship between the different energy sector stakeholders, we talk about it here in this article, which you can download for free. But if you want those resources, or even in more detail, some books I've written recently, do contact me there, and I'll be happy to take the questions later in the Q&A session. So thank you very much, and thank you to the electricity lawyer for the organization of such a timely and important topic.
Thank you so much. I mean, that was really, really insightful conversation. And I would like to request the audience to give Professor Raphael a warm round of applause, because you've really touched on the key aspect of the ECT. If not for the time constraint, I would have loved that we have this session for an hour, but I know the electricity lawyer team will frown at that, because it's really interesting when you look at these things, and it's not really black and white. It's not a binary thing, and there are some gray areas. And like the PRI, this case that you mentioned about the investment, the gas dispute, I was following it at the time, and it's just really murky, and you can't say which side is really fair and which side is just and which side is otherwise. So it's really interesting. And you mentioned about the technology race, which we cannot really take out from this whole conversation. And all in all, it's been really interesting. And Now we would like to have the EL presentation. I know you'll be able to talk more. I mean, Professor Raphael, you'll be able to talk more when we have the discussion, and you'll be able to chip in some of the aspects that I know you left out in the keynote address because of time constraint. So now I would like to invite Evie to give us the electricity lawyer presentation. Over to you, Evie.
Thank you very much, Alfred. I'll just pull up my PowerPoint. Can a member of the electricity lawyer team please put up the slides? I'm having a bit of a challenge sharing it from my screen. Thank you. So Professor Heffern has actually taken a lot of most of the discussions from my slides, so I will skip a lot of aspects and go straight to the main focus areas once it is up. It seems there's a bit of sorry for the delay. I'm not sure why there's a delay. Okay, yes, thank you. It's up now. Thank you. So if you just move over to the next slide, please. So, like I said, Professor Heffern has taken most of the issues I was going to highlight, but I'll skip through the slides because I don't have a lot of time. Next slide, please. So just to give a bit of a background, there is a current debate about the energy transition pathway, especially for countries across sub-Saharan Africa who are contending with two global issues. One, there's the energy access gap, and then there's the issue of energy poverty in the region. And like we're witnessing, countries in the global north are making plans to exit the treaty as signatories, but on the other end, we have countries from Africa acceding to the treaty. And there is a new mechanism and it's currently being considered based on the modernization of the Energy Charter Treaty, which I will refer to as ECT. And that flexibility mechanism seeks to exclude investment protection for fossil fuels in territories that have ascribed to it, essentially. What does this mean for sub-Saharan Africa? We'll be looking at that in the subsequent slides. Next slide, please. So the next slide sort of gives an overview of the energy charter. Next slide, please. We can skip this. I believe we all know the energy access gap in the region, and this slide just speaks to the deficits, just to show the electricity deficit using the World Bank's rule of thumb, estimating that approximately 1 million people require 1,000 megawatts. So if you take the population of a given country and you divide that by 1,000 and you minus that by the actual generation capacity, you'll be able to see the deficit in their electricity generation. So we sort of did a region wide assessment. Next slide, please. And compared it against the United Kingdom. And as you can see, there's a huge disparity. And if we look at this graph, it shows this chart, sorry, it shows the fuel mix in sub-Saharan Africa with fossil fuels dominating our mix. Next slide, please. This speaks to the renewable energy targets. As you can see on the left is for sub-Saharan Africa, and you can see that a lot of countries in red shows that they are not as ambitious with meeting those targets, and understandably so, because of the dilemma of addressing energy poverty and dealing with other critical issues within the various economies, unlike the European counterparts who have more ambitious targets. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go through this because I believe Professor Heffron has done justice to this. Speaking about the objectives of the ECT and how it seeks to offer protection to investors who can bring claims against host states for breaches of substantive provisions of the treaty. And one peculiar feature of the ECT is that it's energy agnostic, so it applies to all forms of energy sources. And this again is the benefit of the ECT, but it's also its disadvantage because foreign investors utilizing any form of energy source in their operations can take advantage of the provisions of the ECT. And as Professor Heffron said, it is one of the most significant bilateral and multilateral trade agreements. So it has huge significance as we move forward. But whether it is still relevant or will still be relevant is another question. Next slide, please. So the ECT, as has been highlighted, has become a huge subject of controversy. Like I said, it's energy agnostic and offers equal protection to all forms of energy. And so what this has done is governments are discouraged from putting in place phase-out policies to phase out fossil fuels in order to avoid legal claims and actions being instituted by investors. So this is what is known as regulatory chill, where the government takes a back seat in putting forward or advancing regulations on the back of an existing treaty or framework that hinders them from doing so to avoid legal claims. So the ECT is, like I said, energy agnostic, and investors, mostly in fossil-based operations, will increasingly be affected by new laws and regulations that are passed for them to meet their emission reduction obligations. So this now begs the question as to the relevance of the ECT, the modernization process, or if we need a new international law regime altogether. The next slide, please. So this just speaks to the modernization. I'm not going to go through it, but I highlighted the subject of contention, which is the flexibility mechanism that allows contracting states to exclude the treaty's investment protection for fossil fuels in their territories. Next slide, please. And the one of the criticisms of this mechanism is that it doesn't allow, there's no automatic reciprocity. So a country like a region like the United Kingdom can exclude fossil fuel investments in its territory, but continue to enjoy protection in the territory of other contracting parties unless they invoke the same flexibility mechanism as well. But currently, the modernization process is still ongoing because there's a lot of debate and contention as to the proper pathway that should follow. Next slide, please. So let us kind of see, so to understand how this modernization process affects sub-Saharan Africa, we need to first look at the global energy trends. So the IEA has opined that investment is increasing in all parts of the energy sector, but mainly coming from the power sector. And this looks at both renewables and fossil fuels. Next slide, please. If we then now look at the global energy production trends, we would see that if you look at the top world countries in the last year, they produce more energy from fossil fuels than renewables. So only Germany and possibly the United Kingdom have shown a fair quota between renewables and fossil fuel production at a close range. So next slide, please. If we now look at the consumption patterns, we would see that the energy consumed by those same reference countries are tilting more towards fossil fuels in the blue bar. So more countries consumed fossil-based energy than renewables in 2022. So if we now look at how, bring it down to the EU countries, next slide please, to see the pattern as well before we now look at the UK specifically. We will see that even in 2022, countries in the EU, the difference between energy production from renewables and from fossil fuels is not so significant. So it might show that there is progress in renewable energy production, but it is not very significant. Next slide, please, because if we look at the consumption patterns from the same countries, we would see that there's a huge disparity in electricity in consumption, and the patterns show that more of fossil fuel sources were consumed for electricity generation. So it's clear that EU countries still consume more electricity from fossil fuel sources than renewables. Next slide, please. If we then take it down to the UK, the UK aims to achieve net zero by 2050, but we can see that in terms of its investments in the energy transition, there has been a steady decline across the years down to 2023. If we compare that with investments in fossil fuels, we would see that the margin is not so significant. Next slide, please. So if we look at the similar investments in fossil fuels, they have actually invested more. The investments in fossil fuels have steadily been increasing compared to investment in the energy transition and clean energy sources. But that it will adequately assess that it is also good to look at the electricity generation patterns to see if, because investment alone, next slide please, investment alone may not necessarily inform increased electricity generation. So, but if we look at it from the electricity generation angle, we would see a different picture. Next slide. So if we look at the graph in the next slide, which is speaking to UK's electricity generation from renewables, we would see that in 2022, I think 2021, well, there was a decline because of COVID and other attendant issues, but we can see that from renewables, it increased in 2022. Next slide, please. And if we see the generation pattern from fossil fuels, we can see a steady increase in electricity generation from fossil fuels. Next slide, please. So now assessing what this means, you can see that there's a parallel commitment towards both renewables and fossil fuels because generation capacity from renewables has been steadily increasing and capacity from fossil fuels it's steadily declining. Now, the drop in fossil fuel in 2020, like I said, was linked to the COVID-19 lockdown. So you can see that they are both at a close range. So when we examine the UK's commitment to its net zero goals, looking at it from both financial investment and actual generation capacity, we can infer that the UK has made only limited progress in its commitment to meeting its net zero goal, because you can see from the graph that there was higher financial investment in fossil fuels compared to renewables, and the generation capacity really from both sources were at similar range. But like I said, the investments in fossil fuel and even in renewables may not necessarily be adequate to inform the pattern, because the low investments in renewables may be attributable to the existence of incentives, so things like rebates and subsidies. And when you have those incentives in place, it drives down the cost of investment and brings down your capex. But it doesn't erase the fact that the UK has a similar close range of actual generation capacity from both sources, which ideally should not be the case, because if I invest more in renewables, it should actually be higher, because if there are incentives and rebates that drive down costs, it means electricity generation presumably should be increasing from renewable energy sources. But we can see that that wasn't necessarily the case. Next slide. So in the UK itself, we're seeing that there's been increased investments in fossil fuel extraction projects. And these projects, according to the IEA, would violate the provisions of the report, which seeks to achieve the world staying within the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit, and do not see Transition Authority has issued licenses and is in the process of issuing more licenses for oil and gas exploration. So considering that the flexibility mechanism gives a timeline of 10 years for existing investments, we can see that any approval of licenses would portray or depict a double standard by the UK in meeting its energy transition pledges. But again, let's remember that there was the recent energy crisis traced to the Russian-Ukraine war. So the UK will still need gas and oil to manufacture important items like plastics, fertilizers, etc. And so the UK must continue to support its local oil and gas output as the North Sea basin production diminishes. So they are dealing with a dilemma of addressing their domestic supply needs against continued imports from Russia, which had caused significant crisis in the country. Next slide, please. So if we now say what is the implications for countries across sub-Saharan Africa? So while the flexibility mechanism will continue to protect investments in all types of fossil projects within the 10-year timeline, African countries have to take this into consideration, and this can have an impact on how well they pursue renewable energy targets and energy transition goals. And it may slow down the plans of countries to transition from fossil fuels to renewables, as the Energy Charter Treaty protects national investments in fossil fuels made within the flexibility timeline. So you're likely to see investors using this as a basis to claim legal recourse and hold governments accountable for any actions or policies that deviate from or affect their investment. So African countries would or should come up with policies and strategies that will enable them profit from fossil fuel investments within that 10-year timeline, if it actually kicks off, and subsequently channel the returns from such investments to meet their renewable energy goals. Because remember, we're dealing with not just energy access, but also energy poverty. So we're likely to see a lot of European countries who are exiting from the ECT, invested in African countries in critical minerals in the race towards meeting their targets. So if we put in place appropriate strategies and proper planning for the various scenarios that are likely to play out, there are opportunities for African countries to take a leap from their current state of energy poverty and insecurity to achieving or meeting their energy transition targets, and also addressing the issue of energy access and energy poverty, therefore they're not losing out on both sides of the divide. Next slide, please. So what is the solution going forward? If we look at the status quo, if the flexibility mechanism still remains and the modernization of the charter still goes on, the North Sea Authority can rule out, may or should rule out all new fossil fuel extraction projects in order not to be seen as being putting out double standards, or cancel all future licensing rounds. Or what they can also do is the government can fix a deadline to phase out production from active and developed fields. So you're likely to see early closures of currently producing or underdeveloped fields in order to meet their climate targets. The limits of compensation are whether to companies operating using fossil fuels can be reduced to discourage fossil fuel investment. And the UK government can also issue statements and policies discouraging fossil fuel extraction. This is just to ensure that there's no double standard. So on the one hand, they're putting forward targets to meet climate emission goals, but on the other hand, we're still seeing increased investments in oil and gas projects. So this focusing their targets on renewable energy development will gradually put an end to their reliance on exports, and they're likely to see increased investments in domestic supply of energy. Next slide, please. I'm rounding up. So next slide, please. So if we look at moving away, actually achieving flexibility and shifting away from the norm, several tools can also be deployed. You can use contractual tools to make room to extend the timescale of the flexibility mechanism, and in addition to measures that permit revisions and adjustments to the mechanism to factor unforeseen circumstances. So similar to the force majeure clause in commercial contracts. Global energy justice, which is Professor Heffron's area of specialty. If we hinge that on the CBDR common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities principles, and if we take into account resource adequacy for countries to invest in meeting their climate targets, then we can propose that the higher income countries can establish and strengthen their financial commitment to the lower income countries, because the Paris Agreement actually, through the CBDR policy principle, makes room for that. And we can also use international cooperation tools on a just energy transition within and between countries. So addressing issues relating to disproportionately affected countries, you can employ tools ranging from soft law guidance, coordination mechanisms, or international law principles relating to legally binding treaties. Or as alluded to by Professor Heffron, maybe we need to consider a new international investment regime and allow the Energy Charter Treaty to I don't say die a natural death, but go under the carpet. So thank you very much, and I believe we'll take questions at the appropriate time. Thank you. Over to you, moderator.
All right, thank you so much, Ify, because I felt like if you had more time, you'll be able to explain more on some of the things in the presentation. From my own perspective, the presentation is good, and I personally would like to have access to it. Is there a way other members of the audience can access this presentation? Because you employed a fire brigade approach to just go through all of them. I mean, while we're able to pick the specifics, it's just good that we also enjoy the richness of the presentation. So if there's a panel where access, you can put that to the chat box so that participants can have access to it. Thank you so much. From your presentation, I was able to take away the disparity between the electricity consumption, particularly the fossil fuel-based operations, and that of the generation, because like you mentioned, EU countries cannot keep paying lip service to energy transition by funding fossil fuel-based operations outside the UK, for instance, and claiming to want to achieve a net zero by 2050 or whatever year. So it's also good that, like you recommended, countries make assertive actions to back up their advocacy and also some of these agenda. While we were having this conversation, we had Professor Hayuk. He joined us. I don't know if he would like to say a word to us now. Mr. Hayuk. Hello, sir.
Alfred, thank you so much for having me, and I must apologize for turning up late. I am dialing in from Mozambique. It is amazing, and Ivy, you are my hero. I love listening to you, love the work you guys do. It's really amazing, great presentation from Raphael. And I pretty much come into with I always say, and I like an African context to this. And I look forward to being part of the roundtable discussions. But just a quick remarks here is that we need to take into consideration our African realities. Our African realities are not European realities, and European realities have a different kind of take to ours. Our numbers of energy poverty with 600 million in this continent, it's double that of the EU. The EU is a continent of 300 million people, and we have 600 million without electricity. So you imagine if you just have 10 million people in Europe or a European city without electricity. That is the reality here. And I think, Raphael had really great presentation where he did to discuss about fossil fuel companies having offshore companies. It's just business. Everybody does. Name one renewable company working in Africa that is not offshoring. When we talk about Africa losing a lot of its revenues going to tax shelters, the majority of the DFI funding is going to renewables. And those renewable companies are short Bahamas and everything. I'll end with this. We discuss energy charter. I love the energy charter and how African states have to get into the energy charter. It's really key. But let's be very careful. July this year, the EU called for a coordinated withdrawal of the energy charter after Germany, Spain, France, and many EU countries were withdrawing. You ask yourself, why is that question? Why? Why are they withdrawing from the energy charter? It's because of two words, energy security. So their energy security is of big importance. Big question we have is that why is the energy security of African people, the poorest people, not of that importance? Are we saying that a young girl in Mozambique, where I am, or in Enugu, or in Katsina, or in the Niger Republic, or in Burkina Faso, doesn't have the right to a decent life or electricity so they can read at night? Are their life not as good as somebody living in Paris or Frankfurt or Berlin or Portugal? We need to have some fairness. So if you want to talk about criticizing, fossil fuels, who is using the most fossil fuels? I live in Johannesburg, South Africa. The majority of the coal is going to nowhere but the EU. They are taking all the coal and leaving us in the dark. So who is using the fossil fuels? Africa's renewable systems are actually, our grid is actually more renewables than theirs. They declared gas as green, not Africa. They declared nuclear as green, not Africa. And then you put the blame on Africa. We need to be careful. So I'll stop right here and I look forward to a spirited conversation. And Alfred, don't you worry, Ivy had me here for a reason. So we'll talk on it.
Thank you so much. I mean, you're bringing the African perspective to the conversation, like you mentioned, and a lot of people have expressed this same opinion that you can't put the burden of a renewable energy on Africa when we still don't have the considerable amount of energy access compared to our European counterpart. And this is an open-ended conversation. It will really be interesting having you on the panel. And now I can see a lot of people have been throwing in their questions. I think we have a question for Professor Ephron. And also there's also someone who wants to connect with Professor Ephron after this conversation. We're going to address the questions, but let's quickly rush the questions for our panelists. So I would like to have Professor Raphael now. We have 3 questions here, but because of our time, normally we should spend 15 minutes, but because we are behind schedule, we'll just spend 10 minutes on the question. Professor Raphael?
Yeah, you want me to answer the two questions in the chat?
Yeah, before answering the two questions in the chat box, there's the part of the flexibility, like Ivy has mentioned, and don't forget that the ECT has made the EU countries a target of billion-dollar lawsuit from fossil fuel companies, and there's a building momentum of many countries exiting the treaty, like a lot of people have mentioned. And we have the ECT article of the so-called sunset or survival clause for 20 years. And the treaty will continue to apply to existing EU investment in other ECT members and to existing investment made by other ECT members, investors in the EU. So from your own perspective, do you consider this the principle of procedural justice, openness, and inclusivity has been considered before putting forward the modernization, particularly the flexibility mechanism on the table?
Well, let's say for me, I don't think it goes far enough, because for me, I think we have to remember that it is about a technology race where technology can change much faster than we think. So we need even more flexibility than is being proposed. The change of the modernization of the treaty doesn't go far enough. And what I will point to is, if you look at people using mobile phones, cars, if you look at Tesla, while most of the world isn't driving a Tesla car, Tesla is now worth more than the 10 next biggest car companies. Some of those have been around for 100 years, the biggest car companies. And in the space of 12 years, Tesla is worth more than the 10 biggest car companies. And I would point you to, tablets, mobile phones, computers. The technology in 20 years has changed. And if you look at the potential for technology development, and here will be maybe a question that I would like some of the other panelists to think about, is, when you think of people who don't have access today, my view would be it's far easier to invest and give them access to some solar energy, because how long does it take to build these gas pipelines? It takes 6, 10, 12 years. It takes 4 to 6 years to build a gas plant. It only takes 2 years to build a wind turbine. So even in building costs for large scale electricity development, I wonder about even the construction times. If you want to give people access, the easiest way, particularly in rural areas, is to give them either solar or wind. It can be constructed very, very cheaply. And to give you one example, in India, in the space of 10 years in India, despite having lots of its own coal, despite importing lots of coal from South Africa as well as Australia, India decided to make a big push in solar energy. And in the space of, I think, 8 years, they got solar energy down in cost by 80%. And and they were even purchasing all the solar panels from China. So, imagine that they're importing it all from China, and still they get the cost down by 80%, and they get electricity to people, as it were, tomorrow. They don't have to wait for these legacy big projects to be built that take 4 to 6 years. We all know the construction problems and things that happen in these big projects as well. So my view is a safer bet is the shorter bet of giving people clean energy very quickly and very fast. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for answering that. And you know, part of the aims of the energy justice is to create an inclusive models for energy transition. And even with the ECT flexibility mechanism, European countries are exiting the charter. What pathways do you think the EU can undertake to guide their withdrawal from the ECT without flouting the principle of energy justice as regards other contracting members of the ECT? Because they said they are leaving, and the ECT is saying even in 20 years, some of these investment agreements still stand. So do you think there's a way they can wriggle out of that without flouting the principles of energy justice?
Well, I think it comes back to one of the points I think Ivy, I believe, mentioned, and I mentioned, was we have to remember that public policy on issues in society changes over time. And I think public policy around the Energy Charter has changed over time. You know, we need a much more flexible instrument. Ideally, you would say if the EU countries are leaving, we need a new instrument in place so that, you know, there's something that we can still hold European companies and countries to account. But my wonder is, I think international finance and the principles around international finance, how you borrow money internationally, you know, in many ways has overtaken something like the Energy Charter Secretariat. You know, if you want to borrow money internationally, you have to get prove that you have the permit to build in a particular country. You have to show all the risk factors. You have to highlight, you know, what are the policies that a government in that country are considering, what might be the policies they will consider in future. And then you have to seek insurance. And seeking insurance, they will factor in all these risks anyway. And I think it's maybe a fairer system than tying people down to a guaranteed 20-year investment for some old technology. I mean, if someone said if you want the latest mobile phone, but you have to sign a 20-year contract, you'd say no, thank you.
Thank you so much for answering that. For now, I will move to Mr. Hayuk, and he brings the Africanness to the conversation. And Mr. Hayuk, like you mentioned earlier, that the EU's reality is not our own reality. And I mean, from your level of expertise and involvement in Africa's oil and gas industry, do you think it's a profitable step towards achieving energy security and economic development on the continent? Because a lot of African countries are now ratifying the ECT. While European partners are leaving, Africans are saying, we still want this, we want this, and with the flexibility mechanism. Do you think this is a profitable step?
Yes, I do. I do believe it is a profitable step. It's a profitable step. One of the key things you have to realize is that fossil fuels are here to stay. We have to seek to get to net zero by 2050. It's very possible. You're going to get, you could phase out coal rapidly, and that could be done. Africans didn't say natural gas is green. The EU said natural gas is green, and the good professor is right when he says that the financing systems is kind of overtaking the energy charter. The EU basically is killing the energy charter, because you get out of the energy charter, and at the same time, you declare natural gas as green, you declare nuclear as green. So guess what? It paves the way for you to finance your own development, paves the way for you to finance your own energy security. But when it comes to Africa, you're not going to finance it. That's why we had a big meeting with President Macron in France, where we said your whole financial system is not working because it's geared towards you, and it's all about you, and there's nothing in there for us, and this has to change. when you look at oil and natural gas in Africa, we have to operate sustainably. I agree with a good professor on one thing. We have to ensure that we don't have stranded assets, but we also have to ensure that we don't have stranded lives. And mini grids and all of that being built in village and local communities is good. That might be a first step. But Africans do not just need electricity to charge their cell phones or their laptops. They need base load. They need base load. And that's going to be the key word when you look at our electricity system. It's going to be base load. That base load that creates jobs, that base load that creates industrialization, that base load that creates us to have a big part of life. But we also have to really be very pragmatic. And pragmatism is going to be key. That's going to drive our energy systems for Africa. How do we phase out coal and phase out coal quickly? But also, how do we bring in natural gas as a transition fuel while you thrive in renewables? But this idea that we got to really get into energy charter trade, which I think is a good thing. It's not a bad thing, or wait for the EU or the Europeans with their rules to see how that gets us into transition. It's really dangerous. They have never in our history really given. Let me ask you this, $800 billion has been given to Africa with aid over the last 30 years. How much does that, what does that change? Nothing. You've had an assortment of fufu head leaders together with African elites and their European counterparts have really plundered this. So let's not act as if we in Africa, we are immune to that. We have not created that enabling environment. The professor mentioned something really good about cell phones and all of these renewables. Beautiful. But why don't we build a supply chain in Africa? We should be really looking at electricity lawyers. We should really be asking ourselves that those enabling environment that would create and spur innovation and growth within our continent, rather than us going to Europe to beg or going to China to ask for that, because we should be having renewable hubs everywhere around Africa at the same time when we're using gas, whether it's in East Africa, West Africa. This is the continent that produces pesa. So don't tell us we can't use technology. The supply chain should be built in this continent, and financing should come this continent. $600 billion in financing in green bonds. You know how much went to this continent? Less than 2%. The majority of your renewable projects and financing coming out of DFIs, do you know how much is going to Africans? Less than 7%. Majority is European companies, American companies getting those renewable projects right here in this country and being financed in that. We are not going to get out of this with looking for handouts or aid. So I love movies. Superman is not coming. Batman is not coming. Wakanda Forever is a great movie, but the Black Panther is not coming. You would have to do this all by yourself.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ayu. And you raised a very salient point that Africa is no longer a place to give handouts, and we should move from this aspect of tokenism. And because, for instance, you mentioned that we need industrialization, and that to happen, we need to put the right infrastructure in place. And for instance, if you follow in Nigeria's Lagos has built a metro line, and part of what will be used to power this kind of industrialization that we're hoping to get is electricity, not just to charge phones, not just to have our bulbs lighting up and all of that. So you mentioned earlier that it's possible for us to have these fossil fuel-based operations and still achieve our climate actions, the net zero, by 2050. How feasible is that? I mean, because coming from the perspective of you as someone in the business aspect of it, and also trying to balance that with the climate action, how possible is that? Because if you look at it, in recent past, we have discovery of oil in places like Namibia, Ivory Coast, Ghana, even Gabon has 205 million barrels as of today. And do you think if we keep saying fossil fuel based operation is here to stay, don't you think that can hinder the net zero goal?
Alfred, I'm not the one saying it's here to stay or fossil fuel based operations. My greenhouse gas emissions in Africa are less than 2.73%. If you take South Africa and Egypt out, it's 0.5%. So it's like you telling the fat kid in the classroom is telling the skinny kid to stop eating while the fat kid keeps eating. Germany is opening new coal-fired plants. That's not my fault. The UK is going behind on all its climate policy. That's not Africa's fault. France is taking more, it's opening coal-fired plants. That's not an African fault. So I think you can't put your climate concern on Africa. Africa is not the problem. The wealthy nations need to decarbonize. African nations need to industrialize. So I tell you how that's exactly how you get to net zero by 2050. It's very easy. But also part of this also things that Africa has a big role to play. And the part of that role is that you're not going to expect poor people to pay reparations to wealthy nations that continue to expand an energy system with coal use. You're not going to expect that. That is the worst thing I've seen when it comes to climate justice. And sometimes they have the audacity to sit in front of us in our face and try to give us lectures on how they have to go when their main houses are all powered by coal and when we are without electricity. I mean, and I tell this to you. We have to bring some morality into this. Africa is going to determine the future. We're going to have 2.5 billion people by 2050. If we don't really change things in Africa, our energy, our growth, insecurity is going to get higher. For 20 years, we didn't see a lot of coup d'etats. Over the last 3 years, we've seen 10 coup d'etats in this continent. Young Africans are angry. They don't want to be crossing the Mediterranean to look for jobs in Europe. They don't want to be going to Dubai and get insulted in the streets of Dubai. They want to see prosperity right at home. The African elites and the European counterparts have failed young Africans. They have. Their promises of the past, where is the $100 billion they promised in Kyoto? Since 2015 in Paris, they promised $100 billion to the poor country, which that's very small, by the way. How much has come? Zero. So you start.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ayu. I would have loved to go on and on, but
I know
I
I'll
have less
stop
than
there.
3 minutes.
You see, I'm a
Yeah, less than 3 minutes, and I still have a
and
question for
now.
you.
Huh?
Yeah, I know you still want to explain more, and I also want you to answer one more question. And in the meantime, before I go to the last question for you, sir, which will help me answer in two minutes, I would appreciate if our participants can drop their questions so that I know as I have questions, you also have questions. You can put your questions in the chat box or use the Q&A box to ask your question. So now that you've agreed that, I mean, Africa is not the problem, in clear terms, how do you think we can employ this ECT flexibility mechanism to foster an environment where nations can share experience and support each other to align on energy policies, both national and global climate needs?
I think it's very easy. You combine the ECT mechanisms together with one thing that has worked in Africa, but we've not really implemented, is going to be, you combine that with the AFTA, intra-Africa trade. That's how you do it. That's how I do it. It's very easy. It's very easy. Take the ECT, intra-Africa trade, and you do that. Because you know what? We're trading with everybody except ourselves. So shared lessons learned, intra-Africa trade is less than 10%. Get rid of visas. You don't need visas. I mean, I had to wait at the airport in Mozambique for an hour trying to get a visa to travel my beautiful continent. And I'm a Pan-Africanist, and I can't get a visa. Professor Raphael can travel around Africa more than everything. But then when I come to you in Nigeria, I need a visa, and you're going to say you want to bam, you want to chill with the big boys. How are you going to do that if you don't have visas? So we need to be able to get rid of these things and really do that. So it's very clear, it's concise, but we need to hold ourselves, Alfred, accountable. Our enabling environments don't work. We need to have those fiscal policies that bring in renewables. We need to have those fiscal policies that really drive this kind of growth. And I end with this. Out of all African, and you guys probably know this, but than I do, all of our utilities, which you want to talk about electricity, only 2 of them are profitable. The one in Morocco and the one in Seychelles. What happened to the others? Eskom in South Africa, $23 billion in debt. In NEPA in Nigeria, I would not say anything. I have a lot of Nigerian friends, so I don't want them to kick me. But there is a lot of public utilities that are basically bankrupt, are being subsidized every day. They should be the drivers of this electricity growth around. The implementation of the ECT should be driven by our power utilities. That's how it worked in Europe. European utilities took on the ECT, drove it around, it guaranteed them energy security, it really guaranteed them even the importation of natural gas from the Maghreb region in North Africa to solve the gas issues around Portugal, Spain, France, and everything, while they built on big hydro plants around Portugal. We need to be looking at that. So we need to hold ourselves accountable. It's no longer acceptable that you cannot have a public utility in West Central and Southern Africa that reports profit in the last 25 years. So they are enabling environment. I'll put it, we lawyers, enabling environment, and we need to run better companies. That's not hating on Africans. That's basically looking at ourselves in the mirror and saying the truth. And with this, mirrors are not just to reflect what you see. Mirrors are to correct what we see. So if there's anything we get out of this discussion, we need to go out there correcting what we see, because I'm not worried about Europe. I don't expect anything from them. They don't owe us anything. They don't owe us anything. They have to take care of themselves. But we owe it to ourselves. We owe it to these young people to do what is better for them. Africa is crying. Africa is unhappy. We are not living up to our true meaning. We cannot go out there begging. It is a shame. Africa's begging bowl is leaking.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hayu. We have no question from the participants at the moment, but I would like to ask another question, which is the suggestion of a new investment regime. Do you think we should just throw the ECT, if it gets to a point, throw the ECT in the dustbin, then start a new investment regime?
No, don't throw it away. Mend it, don't end it. Don't throw it away, because Europe used it to build, develop. We should use it to build, develop. Does it need to be reformed? Yes. Are there some things that we need to use? You don't cut and paste that into Africa. You look at what can be useful in Africa, combine it with your intra-Africa trade. Look at national policies, don't end it. The Europeans did that out of expediency. They did that out of expediency. If Putin didn't start the war in Ukraine, they wouldn't have done that. They would have still held back, and it was convenient for them. But right now, part of this idea that in a global society, and you talk about a global world order, that when the rules don't work well for you, you either get out, change it, but then when they when they work well for you, you get everybody to comply. I think it sends something so wrong with the idea when you tell poor nations that rule of law, democracy, and also this idea of oneness and working together with a vision that we can drive that. They cannot always just pick and choose. I'm from the fossil fuel industry and I'm proud of it. I hate when people demonize the fossil fuel industry. But I also tell you this, I think it's very dangerous when out of a sudden somebody decides that fossil fuels, gas is green energy. They change the taxonomy because it suits them. Gas is green energy. Nuclear is green energy. And we'll finance it for us, but not for you. Who the poor. You can't just change the rules as they go. The rules have to work for everybody. That's why we say in a system as lawyers, the rule of justice is blind. Justice should work for everybody. We shouldn't have one legal system for the rich and one for the poor. We can't have a two-tier system. That is what the Europeans backtracking from the ECT. That is what the Europeans flaunting the ECT and flaunting every global world order or rules-based system. Rules-based system is what built Europe. Capitalism.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ayuk. I would like to refer to Prof. Professor Raphael.
Yeah, thank
Don't
you.
worry, he's frozen.
Yeah, that's fine. I just want you to react to that aspect of having a new investment regime. What do you think it will look like? Are you in support?
Well, I think if you look at the data in terms of international disputes around energy, the majority of disputes are actually outside of the Energy Charter Treaty. So for me, if you truly want to capture all the problems in the international investment arena, I think you really do need a new type of treaty that has different levers around technology development, and even something as was mentioned in terms of or one of the good ideas that has been mentioned is, supply chains need to be created in more and more countries, and you can't keep going back to the same countries that have had all the supply chains, controlled them all. But at the same time, for me, if you think about the whole international finance world, all those financial chains that exist around the world, they need to change too. So if you talk about money not being freed up, the 100 billion never materializing, well, and for me, we need to have a broader change. And for me, that's why we have to face facts that some of the current financial, let's call it the current financial architecture system, which the Energy Charter Secretary or the Energy Charter Treaty is part of, that needs to all change. It's a system that is, to me, that is broken. The money isn't going where it should. So we need something that is going to be a better representation. So more people should have voice into a new agreement. To me, the Energy Charter is, you could say it's still a child of the EU. Amending it is just going to make it a teenager of the EU, and we want a more adult system for this world. So for me, I think replace it and get more voices onto the table. And I think a key thing is, how do we finance the development of supply chains? How would you get 5 or 6 African countries coming together and saying, look, we actually have the material, why don't we coordinate and we develop our own solar panel manufacturing plant between 5 or 6 of us? I mean, the costs decrease could be dramatic, let's say, over time, and there will be no reliance on external providers for finance. There will be no reliance on let's say, on Chinese panels, but over time, the whole financial architecture of the solar energy industry would change for 5 or 6 countries, and more broadly for the continent. And I think, for me, a new type of investment regime needs to reflect that, and it definitely needs more voices.
All right, thank you, sir. We have a question. We have actually 2 questions, so I will let you take one. While I think the second one is specifically from the thought-provoking issues raised by Mr. Ayuk, according to one of our participants. So the first question is, the person writes, ECT is to end African energy poverty. Why can't African leaders put resources together to lift Africa out? Dependency. I actually don't know what this participant is saying, but I think from my understanding of the question, the person is suggesting that African leaders should make efforts to lift the country out of energy poverty. Do you think a charter exclusively for Africans is necessary? I mean, talking in light of having a new investment treaty.
If you should let me do that, go, I say yes, we need. And I think if we do that, it's going to be world class. But again, I still coming. Don't fail on what you have put with the intra-African free trade. We could mandate it. I would love to see some mandates in a new charter for Africa, which says maybe 25% of revenues coming out of fossil fuels go into driving up scaling up renewables in our continent. That would
But don't also forget that, for instance, we have AFCT here. Sorry to cut in. Remember, we have the AFCT here, and we still have issues surrounding it. I mean, that's African, and we're still yet to really get it right.
That would come to my next point, and that where someone asks about African Development Bank, AU, and everything. We have to change our approach. You got to put skin in the game. You got to put skin in the game. We fly private jets to Dubai and London and the US, but we can't even provide something as small as an African Union Secretariat. When 90% of your African Union, 90% is being paid for by aid money from the EU and the US and wealthy countries, you're not calling the shots. When you are building in Addis Ababa, it's built by the Chinese, and they buck the entire place. Anything you say in private, they're listening to it. You don't have any kind of sovereignty or independence to make any kind of big decisions. When your African Development Bank, almost 48% of it is being financed by Western countries. So what happens is that's why you have Brother Desina, when he tried to back gas, they almost ran him out of the place, and they said, cut out fossil fuels. I mean, you saw they start bringing up issues that, oh, he hired a Nigerian consultant, and that's a reason for him to be thrown out. So this guy, amazing history, won awards, honorary degrees. But they went on a smear campaign for him for almost 6 months just because he tried to stand up for Africa. So when your own institutions you have no control over your institutions. So all they need to do is they cut off funds. But the truth of the matter is that, look at it, we have a continent where you have $2.3 trillion in private capital. 2.3, I'm not saying billion, $1 trillion, but we can't fund our own institutions. So that's a problem. So if you start by funding your institutions to have true independence and have true people working on your behalf, but when somebody else, when the EU or Great Britain or the US is paying for your institution, so what do? You just offer them extracle and per diem and say, hey, you guys come here. I mean, the Africa's our energy program that was drafted in Addis, of course, it's disgusting because it was handed down to them by the GIZ, that's the German Development Institute. So the UK Agency for Development hands you the next one, and you say, oh, this is it. But where's the African one? When the African Development Bank did its own something similar, they were trying to build something similar to the energy charter, and they said they put up everything. You know who wrote it? They rejected 2 Nigerian professors, 2 Ghanaian professors, and a Senegalese professor. These guys were brilliant. You know me, I'm stubborn, but I have the utmost respect for these guys. Really brilliant people. They were put aside, and their consulting gig was given to Jeffrey Sachs. And of course, we needed Jeffrey Sachs to come out here and tell us we got to use solar and wind and everything, not taking into consideration the entire African continent, where if you use even your gas, if you produce all of Africa's natural gas, you get to point, your greenhouse gas goes up only by 0.65. It doesn't really go up. So I would say build your institutions. Europe, America, they're stronger. You know why? Because they have strong institutions, not strong men. In Africa, we need to walk away from strong men and strong institutions. So as long as we have weak institutions, we are going to continue having this problem. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. I would like, no problem. I would like Professor Raphael to react to that. What do you say to having an African or a Pan-African energy charter?
Yeah, I think that's something that could definitely be should be on the table. I think that's, again, it goes to Mr. Ayuk's point of having strong institutions, that's what is needed, greater cooperation. And, you know, if you had a stronger investment framework where investment could come in, maybe, you know, more investment may be able to come in, or it could be directed to more targeted projects. So if you wanted 5 or 6 countries to work together, you know, they could have a mechanism, and it could facilitate an easier mechanism to, you know, target particular projects of cooperation, of let's say cross-border cooperation. So for me, that's where it could be instrumental, and sometimes in terms of creating institutional, let's say, depth and institutional wealth, you know, unfortunately, when you see some of the climate change talks and the international meetings, very few focus on, you know, trying to create innovative ways of new opportunity, and let's say creating these, you know, creating supply chains on the ground, creating how can we make sure investment happens in certain areas, and how can we make sure institutions get stronger so that they can actually deliver for the people properly. Some of those debates are missing at an international level, where, you know, sometimes the debate is more about, for me, investors protecting themselves, and usually they're international investors. Usually they're from a select bunch of 5 or 6 countries trying to protect themselves. But I think we need more. There needs to be a bit more ambitious cooperation. Whether it should only be Africa involved, I mean, I think we need a better system, because you would still have Africa trying to interact with the international financial system, which is kind of, for me, is broken, as it were. So it really needs to have the different voices. You know, you need to have India come in, you need to have China. You know, they do have money to lend, and you need to have South America or Latin America to come in as well. So I think we need a voice that helps more people, and that the money around the international financial system is shared, let's say, shared far more easily between who should actually benefit. And, you know, it's time, rather than going through these standard results, as you said, sometimes people just saying solar energy should happen, or wind should happen. We need some innovative plans. You know, why are we still relying on the same countries for energy technology that we were 20, 30 years ago? You know, why haven't any new countries, new businesses, new companies come along?
Thank you so much, Prof. on a final note, we still have a question that is directed to Mr. Hayuk, and I would like him to answer this and also give us his final, parting word. The question is from Fonko Edmond. He asks, what is your opinion on privatizing their energy sector versus managing it by themselves as a means of reducing energy poverty?
I'm a free market guy. Government needs to get out. And if Africa's failure to use oil and gas to benefit its people is a clear example of government needs to get out. Give you an example. The US has done an amazing thing with energy, with oil and gas. They don't have a national oil company. The UK doesn't have a national oil company. Germany doesn't have a national oil company. France doesn't have a national oil company. What the heck are we doing in Africa? Still trying to build these big monsters of corruption and these big monsters who's sitting there with bureaucrats. You know, there is so many, for example, let's take for a country, Nigeria. It took 20 years to pass the Petroleum Industry Act. You know why? Because bureaucrats were looking left and right to find a way to see how they can protect their own interests. There's so many Nigerian, for example, dockets, projects that are stuck in the hand of bureaucrats because and it's not being approved. And this creates bureaucracy because we have these big monsters in national oil companies or national gas companies that they don't let entrepreneurship. There's so much entrepreneurship among African entrepreneurs that are willing to get out there, go work with their European, American, Asian counterparts, find financing, drive up new projects. But then it shouldn't take too long to approve a project in the time you need to build that project. And that's exactly what you have, because you have these big bureaucracies who think that they own the country, monster national oil companies doing nothing, producing nothing, reporting loss after loss. So guess what? What do you do? I mean, I'm a soccer fan. When a coach loses a game every other time, every other week, you do one thing, you fire him. But in Africa, we keep the same people all the same time, the same institutions that are failing, and then we turn around and say, we have energy poverty, we don't have the results. Get rid of that. So you know what you do? When you privatize that, and you let the private sector run it, you create competition because there is money. You figure out if you can get electricity to 600 million people, you figure out how much billions or trillions of dollars you would make every year. You let Africans with the ingenuity and these young people, they get out there, they make it, and you see that happen. And I end with this. We have to really do a lot more than we are doing. We are the generation that has done nothing. Our generation, Alfred, has done nothing for this continent. You realize that we had guys like Nkrumah and all of these guys, they could free this continent from colonization with no email, no cell phone, no TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. Our generation needs to do more. And it don't matter whether you agree with me or not, I would urge everyone, especially lawyers, that we get really involved in picking our own things and really being those people that shape society. The arc of a moral universe, as Dr. King would say, it's long, but it bends towards justice. It doesn't bend by itself. It's everyday people, it's lawyers, all of us, those non-lawyers that drive it, that make it better, that shape it better. Because when we do that, you would see Europe, America, wealthy nations walk hand in hand with us and give us the respect that we deserve. But we would not earn that respect till we start respecting ourselves, doing the right thing by ourselves. And then with the next person, we would not even need to command respect. They would approach us with respect and your dignity as Black men and women, as Africans from all, I love Africa. We got everybody in this continent from Chop to Charcoal. Everybody lives here. So we would be respected whenever we say, I am an African. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hayuk. And we hope that we'll be able to have you on this series going forward, particularly from the stable of electricity lawyer, you'll be able to
I don't
contribute
have
to conversations like this.
I say no, Ivy would crucify me, so I'm coming.
So I would like Professor Raphael to also give us the closing remark, because we have 6 minutes left. So closing remarks from Professor Raphael in 1 minute.
Okay, I would say at the core of all this, we need to make sure that the transition is a just transition globally and no one is left behind. And that's the key premise for me. And just in the context of what Mr. Ayuk said, I think for me, maybe slightly agreeing with him and slightly disagreeing, but always good for debate. But I think where the new business opportunity really is today is in all this new green technology. And part of the problem is you have the access has been slowed down by state-owned entities. It's not giving the young people who could master this technology and all the opportunities it could bring, it's not giving them the opportunity to push all this technology forward. And if they had that opportunity, I believe, it would diversify the energy portfolio in Africa, and it would also bring in huge revenue and further opportunity. Thank you.
Professor, don't forget to buy. I don't have it free for Professor, so there you go.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. I really appreciate you coming to the conversation, and it's been insightful 2 hours. Questions from our participants, people following on social media. Unfortunately, we won't be able to take some of those important questions, but I hope some of those following this event will be able to engage with some of our facilitators. I think Mr. Hayuk is active on social media, is active on Twitter, and I think also active on LinkedIn. I think same as Professor Raphael. And they can also drop their email addresses in the chat box for people who want to engage them further. We'll be bringing this to a close now. And I would like to take the closing remarks from the founder of Electricity Lawyer, Ms. Ivy Ehamo.
Thank you very much, Alfred. Thank you for moderating and keeping to time. That was really good of you. And thank you for starting the discussions and bringing it to a nice close. Thank you, Professor Heffron, for releasing your time and your insightful knowledge on several issues that have been highlighted. I certainly learned a lot from your discussions. And Angie, thank you for your thought-provoking insights and comments. I think for me, I took a lot out of it because the key lesson is for Africa to look inwards and tackle our internal issues in order to drive industrialization and end energy poverty. Once we do that, we'll be able to drive energy access and move towards our decarbonization agenda. And thank you everyone for participating, both on Zoom and on social media platforms. We'll be holding further series in the near future, and we'll keep everyone informed. Thank you and have a good afternoon, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's it. We're drawing the curtain of this event, and we hope to see you once again. I remain myself, Alfred Olufemi, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon, your evening, or the morning. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.